Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I will recap the movie titled Good Will Hunting. The story begins at MIT University. A professor named Gerald is teaching his class on mathematics. At the end of his lecture, he tells his students that he's going to write a difficult mathematics problem on the board outside the class, and whoever solves it will get their name written on the newspaper. He further encourages his students by saying that previous students who solved that question included top mathematicians. The lecture ends, and then we see Will hunting, a janitor at campus looking at the math problem. Will later goes home and tries to solve that equation on the bathroom mirror. The next day, when he's alone, he takes a chalk and writes the answer to the problem on the board. Outside of work, Will spends his time drinking and hanging out with his friends Chucky, Billy, and Morgan. One day, while watching a baseball game, Will notices a guy who used to bully him at school. Later, he along with his friends go up to that guy and start a fight. His friends stop him, and while the police try to restrain him, he attacks a police officer but gets him arrested. Professor Gerald, on the other hand, gets informed that the math problem is solved. He immediately goes to check and sees that someone has really solved his question. He asks his students if they're the ones who solved it, but he's left confused when none of his students confirm who actually solved the question. His next class gets packed as everyone wants to know who the mysterious math genius really is. Professor Gerald calls for the person to come forward and claim their prize, but the whole class is left staring at each other, waiting for someone to step forward. Just then, Professor Gerald tells his students that he has written another math problem that took him 2 years to solve. Will, on the other hand, gets out of jail and immediately gets to solving the problem. At the same time, Professor Gerald sees Will writing on the board. He tries to confront him thinking that he's just messing with the board, but Will flees the scene. It's only later when Professor Gerald walks back and sees that Will had actually solved the problem. He now knows who the mysterious math genius really is. After work, Will meets his friends and goes to a bar to get some drinks. Seeing a couple of beautiful ladies, Chucky goes up to them and starts flirting. To impress the girls, Chucky lies that he goes to the same class with them. Just then, a man interrupts him and asks what class he exactly means, to which Chucky replies, history. The man knows that Chucky is lying, so he tries to embarrass him by asking his thoughts on historical matters. Not being a history student, Chucky stays silent. So, Will steps in and starts his debate with the man. The man tries to counter, but Will cuts him off and completes his entire sentence. Will then makes fun of that guy for spending thousands of dollars on education which he got for free in a public library. After getting embarrassed, the man walks off. Afterward, one of the girls named Skylar comes to Will and gives him her phone number. Will later shows off that number to the guy who was trying to act smart. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald has been searching for the janitor who solved his problems. After asking around a few people, he finally gets contact information on Will. He shows up at the court hearing of Will in the case of him assaulting a police officer. Will defends himself in the case, but the judge tells him that he has a lot of prior cases of petty theft and assaults. The judge states that he can't turn a blind eye to everything that Will has done and gives him jail time. With that, Will gets sent to prison, but there he meets Professor Gerald, who has a proposition for him. He tells Will that he has spoken with the judge and is ready to pardon him, but Will must agree on two things. The first condition is that Will takes mathematics classes, and the second condition is that he must get counseling. Will laughs at the suggestion of him seeing a therapist, but to avoid jail time, he has no option but to agree with Professor. Soon he starts to take mathematics class with Gerald, who is amazed at Will's intelligence. Next, he has to get counseling from a therapist, but despite how many of them he visits, Will refuses to open up and even makes fun of them. He reads their books the previous night and makes a mockery out of them during his counseling. As a last resort, Professor Gerald turns up to his old friend Sean Maguire for help, who now teaches psychology at a community college. Sean at first says that he doesn't have time to do this, but Professor Gerald insists he should help Will, saying that he's a genius and his counseling can help Will achieve the best in his life. Sean finally agrees and meets with Will. In his first therapy session, Will begins to make fun of Sean's book collection. Sean knows this is Will's defense mechanism and that he's deliberately trying to make him mad. So Sean keeps his composure and engages in normal conversation with him. Will then notices a picture that was painted by Sean himself. Looking at the painting, Will makes several false assumptions about Sean's life. He yet again doesn't react to Will's insults, but when Will brings up his dead wife in the conversation, Sean gets a little bit irritated. Will realizes that Sean's weak point is his wife, so he asks if his wife was cheating on him. Sean loses his mind and grabs Will. He then warns him to never disrespect his wife. Just then, Will tells Sean that the session is over. Sean lets go of him, and Will goes out believing he yet again managed to break a therapist. Seeing Sean's mood, Professor Gerald believes he won't agree to do more sessions with Will, but surprisingly, Sean asks to continue his sessions with Will from next week. After his counseling, Will goes out on a date with Skylar. Will finds out that Skylar comes from a very rich family and is studying at Harvard. The two immediately get along and enjoy their time with each other. Later, Will shows up at Sean's office, who tells him to come outside with him. Sean takes Will out to a park and talks to him. He tells Will that he thought a lot about what he said to him about his painting, after a while came to realize that Will's just a kid who doesn't know what he's talking about. Sean says that he understands that Will doesn't want to speak as he's scared of what he'll say, But at some point, he'll have to start talking, or else he'll never experience the best things in his life. Will then goes back to his life where his friend Chucky picks him up and drives him to their workplace at a construction site. He also calls Skylar, but is afraid of talking to her. On his third therapy session with Sean, Will doesn't speak a word. They just keep silent for the whole hour. The fourth session starts in a similar fashion with Will not speaking a word, but then Will tells a joke to Sean. Taking it as an opportunity, Sean asks if he has a girlfriend. Will then tells him about Skylar and how he hasn't been in contact with her ever since their first date. Sean asks why, and Will replies that he feels Skylar is too good for him, and if he continues talking to her, it'll just ruin everything. Sean then tells him that no one is ever too good or perfect. Everyone has flaws, but what matters the most is if that person is perfect for you or not. Sean then tells him about how his wife, the most beautiful person he ever saw and the one who he fell in love with, had bad habits. This changes the whole atmosphere inside the room. The session ends with Sean advising Will not to think that Skylar is too good for him. He should rather ask if they'll be happy together. Encouraged by his words, Will goes to Skylar's dorm and asks her out again. Skylar says that she wants to go out with him, but she has a very complex problem to solve, which can take her hours. Will cannot wait anymore to see her, so he solves the problem and hands it over to her. With nothing more to worry about, Skylar and Will head out for their second date. Later, he meets Sean on his next therapy session and asks if he has ever regretted meeting his wife. To answer his question, Sean tells him the story of how he met his wife. He says that he first saw his wife while waiting in line to get tickets to an iconic baseball game. Will gets excited thinking that Sean watched that game live in the audience. He asked about it, and Sean details everything that went down in that game. But then Sean reveals that he watched the game later on television as he left the game to go out on a date with the girl he just met. Will cannot believe that Sean gave up on a historical game just so he could spend some time with the girl. Now back to Will's question. Sean answers that he has never regretted not watching that game live in the audience, and he certainly has no regrets meeting his wife. While being together, Skylar asks Will to introduce her to his friends and family. Will is still lying to her about his life, but he reluctantly agrees to introduce her to his friends. Skylar, Will, and his friends meet at a bar, and she seems to like his friends. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald asks Sean about Will's progress. He answers that Will has slowly begun to open up, but he'll need more time before he feels completely comfortable. Professor Gerald reveals that he has been arranging job interviews for Will, but Sean protests that they shouldn't be the ones making life decisions for Will. Professor Gerald is adamant that he won't let Will's talent go to waste. However, Will doesn't want to get a job, so he sends his friend Chucky to the interview in place of himself. One night, while talking about their lives, Skylar asks Will to move to California with her. Hearing what Skylar wants, Will starts to panic and says that he can't move out with her. Skylar asks why he's afraid of committing to her. Will tells her that he was an orphan and spent most of his life moving from one foster parent to another. He further tells her how he was abused and beaten by his foster father. Skylar starts to cry and tells Will that she wants to be with him and help him. But Will lies that he doesn't love her and gets out. In his therapy session with Sean, he gets asked how he plans to earn a living. Will replies that he will work as a construction worker in Boston for the rest of his life. Sean doesn't force him to take the job that Professor Gerald has planned for him, but he asks Will what he really wants to do in his life. Will replies that he wants to be a shepherd. Knowing that Will isn't serious, Sean asks him not to waste his time. Will gets angry and starts shouting, and once again Sean asks him what he wants to do in life. Will stays silent, so Sean tells him to leave. Before Skylar can leave for California, Will calls her to say goodbye. Skylar, in the hope of getting back with Will, tells him that she loves him. Will smiles, but he has no guts to say it back to her. In his conversation with Chucky, Will tells him that he broke up with Skylar. When asked what he wants to do for the rest of his life, Will answers that he plans on living in Boston forever. Hearing this, Chucky tells him that it pains him to see his friend waste his life when there's more that he can achieve and be happy in his life. Chucky wishes that Will would leave his awful life and start doing something meaningful. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald is arguing with Sean about how he hasn't been able to persuade Will to get a job. Sean argues that they shouldn't rush into making Will make important life decisions, but Professor Gerald doesn't agree with this and warns Sean to not let Will spend his life like a failure. The differing views between them end up in a heated argument. Just then, Will walks in and Professor Gerald leaves the room to let their therapy session begin. Sean has a file in which he has pictures of Will's body, filled with bruises from the beating he got from his foster father. Sean steps in front of Will and tells him that whatever happened to him wasn't his fault. Will nods in approval, but Sean repeats the phrase multiple times. Will gets into tears and hugs Sean. He cries his heart out while holding Sean tightly in his arms. He's finally ready to let go of his past and move on ahead in his life. With this, his final therapy session with Sean is over. As a gift for his 21st birthday, Chucky, Billy, and Morgan give him a car. The car isn't new, but Will is happy with the gift, as it's from his best friend. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald goes to Sean and apologizes for what he said to him. The two friends reconcile and Sean tells him that he's going on a world tour. While Sean is packing his luggage, Will drives up to his house and places a letter in the mailbox. In the meantime, Chucky goes to pick up Will at his house. But when he peeks in through the window, he sees that Will isn't home. Chucky smiles as he realizes that Will has finally decided on what he wants to do with his life. Sean also gets the letter left by Will. In the letter, Will writes that he's not taking the job and is going to California to meet Skylar. The film ends as we see Will on his way to get back with Skylar. Thank you for watching our movie recap. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated with our latest content. See you in the next recap.